Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. The morning sun cast golden light over the vast 200-acre farm, the land stretching endlessly beyond the horizon. Flynn Cross had spent his life here, tending to his cattle, working the soil, until they arrived. A gated community, a power-hungry HOA, and one man who wanted him gone. But Flynn wasn't leaving, not without a fight. This was Flynn Cross's land, the same soil his great-grandfather had tilled over a century ago. His family had lived here long before the nearby town had even been mapped out. Flynn had always been a man of quiet routine. Every morning, he rose before dawn, fed the 30 cows, the horses, the goats, and the flock of chickens, and checked the fences for any weak spots. The farm had been his life since birth, and he never once considered leaving it behind. He didn't need the hustle of city life. He didn't crave wealth or luxury. He just wanted to work his land, care for his animals, and sell his products at the weekly farmers market in town. But things had changed over the past few years. A gated community had been built less than a mile away, rising like a blot on the once open landscape. Where there had been nothing but endless fields, now stood identical white houses with pristine green lawns, each one carefully managed by the Homeowners Association, HOA. Wealthy city folk had moved in, trading their urban lifestyles for what they called country living. They loved the idea of being surrounded by nature, as long as nature didn't include real farmers, real animals, or the smell of fresh manure. For the longest time, Flynn had ignored them. His farm wasn't part of their development, and he had no interest in their pointless regulations and petty disputes over mailbox colors and lawn decorations. But the HOA had other ideas. They saw him as an eyesore, a relic of the past that didn't belong in their vision of a perfect rural paradise. At first, the conflicts had been subtle, sideways glances from the new residents as Flynn rode into town on his dusty pickup truck or on horseback, the occasional muttered complaints about the smell of his cattle or the dust kicked up by his tractor. But the tension had escalated once Randy Milton took over as the HOA president. Randy was a former lawyer, a man who thrived on control. He didn't just want order, he wanted absolute domination over anything that fell within his perceived authority. And to him, Flynn's farm was a blemish on his kingdom. One day, a bright red sign appeared at the entrance of the dirt road leading to Flynn's farm. No farm vehicles or livestock beyond this point. HOA enforced. Flynn sat in his truck, staring at the sign, gripping the steering wheel. The HOA didn't own the road. It was a public thoroughfare, used by generations of farmers before him. Randy had no legal authority to put up that sign. Flynn clenched his jaw, stepping out of the truck. Without hesitation, he ripped the sign from the post and tossed it into the back of his vehicle. If Randy thought some cheap metal sign would stop him, he had another thing coming. As Flynn climbed back into his truck, he noticed movement from one of the pristine houses in the gated community. A figure stepped out onto their manicured lawn, arms crossed. Even from a distance, he recognized the arrogant posture, the sharp suit, the smug expression. Randy Milton. Their eyes met for a long moment. Flynn could see the flicker of irritation in Randy's gaze, but he simply tipped his hat and drove off down the road, feeling the first embers of a battle he hadn't wanted, but one he would be damn sure to finish. Flynn Cross had seen his fair share of trouble over the years: droughts, cattle sickness, broken fences, and even the occasional dishonest buyer at the market. But nothing had prepared him for the relentless, underhanded war the HOA was about to wage against him. The morning after he tore down their unauthorized sign, he found a new one nailed to the same post, this time in bolder, larger letters. Private road, no trespassing. Violators will be fined. Flynn let out a sharp breath, his fingers tightening around the worn leather of his gloves. They were testing him, pushing to see how far they could go. But he wasn't about to let some suburbanites with too much free time dictate where he could or couldn't drive. So, once again, he ripped down the sign, tossed it into his truck, and drove toward town. This time, they were waiting for him. As he neared the entrance to the gated community, he spotted a group of HOA board members standing at the roadside, arms folded, expressions carefully controlled, but laced with smugness. In the center of them stood Randy Milton, dressed like he was about to argue a corporate lawsuit instead of fight over a dirt road. Flynn slowed his truck to a crawl, rolled down the window, and rested an arm on the door. "Morning," he said, keeping his voice calm. Randy smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Cross, I believe you ignored our sign." Flynn glanced at the empty post behind them, then back at Randy. "Sure did." "This road isn't meant for heavy farm equipment," Randy continued smoothly. "The dust, the smell, it disrupts our community. You wouldn't want to be a nuisance, would you?" Flynn chuckled, shaking his head. "Son, this road was here before you even knew this town existed. It's county property, not yours." A flicker of irritation passed over Randy's face, but he didn't drop his act. Instead, he gestured toward two private security guards standing nearby. "Then let's see what the county police have to say about that." Flynn exhaled slowly, already seeing where this was going. They were trying to intimidate him, making a show of force. Sure enough, within minutes, a police cruiser rolled onto the scene, lights flashing but sirens silent. Two officers stepped out. One of them, a middle-aged man with a weathered face and tired eyes, recognizable from years of dealing with small-town disputes. "Morning, Sheriff," Flynn greeted, watching as the officer sighed. "Morning, Cross." The sheriff turned toward Randy. "All right, Mr. Milton, what's the issue this time?" Randy squared his shoulders. "This man is trespassing on private HOA property and has repeatedly ignored our regulations." The sheriff gave him a flat look, then turned to Flynn. "You on public land?" "Same road I've been using since I was born." The sheriff barely glanced at Randy before shaking his head. "Mr. Milton, unless your HOA owns the deed to this road, which you don't, Flynn has every legal right to be here." Randy's mouth tightened. "This isn't just about legalities, Sheriff. It's about community standards. His presence disrupts the harmony of our neighborhood." The sheriff let out a slow breath, clearly regretting every second of this conversation. "You don't get to ban someone from using a public road just because you don't like him. You call me out here again for something like this, I'll be fining you for wasting county resources." Flynn had to fight the urge to smirk. He tipped his hat toward the sheriff. "Much appreciated, sir." The officers left, and the HOA members, clearly seething, dispersed. But Randy? He just stood there, watching, as Flynn drove through, untouched, unbothered. He knew this wasn't over. Over the next few days, Flynn started noticing changes. His supplier shipments from the nearby feed store were mysteriously delayed or canceled. A local health inspector showed up at his farm, citing an anonymous complaint about unsanitary conditions, which of course turned out to be completely false. The marketplace where he sold his produce suddenly had no available space for him, despite always having a stall reserved. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind it all. Randy and the HOA weren't just trying to stop him from using the road. They were trying to kill his livelihood. Flynn wasn't a man who liked to fight, but he wasn't about to let a bunch of city-bred rich folks run him off his own land. If they wanted a war, he was damn well going to give them one. Flynn knew he had to hit back, smart and hard. First, he went to the county records office, digging up every document about the road and its public ownership. Then he called the local newspaper. 2 days later, the headline read, "HOA bullies local farmer, attempting to seize public road for personal gain." It detailed everything. The illegal signs, the HOA's interference with Flynn's business, the false complaints meant to harass him. By the time the story hit, the town was buzzing. The locals, many of whom had been raised by farmers just like Flynn, were furious. HOA members started feeling the pressure. Some residents who had originally supported Randy began to reconsider. But Randy, he wasn't done yet. One evening, as Flynn was repairing a fence along the eastern side of his land, he noticed unfamiliar figures moving along his property line. Trespassers, 2 men, dressed in dark clothes, moving quietly toward one of his barns. His gut tightened. They weren't there by accident. Flynn grabbed his rifle from the back of his truck, chambered around, and took a slow, deliberate step forward. Then, with a calm but firm voice, he called out, "You boys got 10 seconds to tell me what the hell you're doing on my land before I start shooting." The men froze. Then, like cockroaches caught in the light, they bolted, running full speed back toward the gated community. Flynn didn't chase. He didn't have to. They were scared, and they damn well should be. As he watched them disappear, a cold realization settled in his chest. This wasn't about signs or rules anymore. The HOA had just crossed the line, and Flynn Cross wasn't about to let it slide. Not now, not ever. Flynn Cross had dealt with adversity before. He'd weathered harsh seasons, financial struggles, and dishonest buyers. but nothing compared to the coordinated assault Randy Milton and the HOA had launched against him. The sign war was just the beginning. The real attack came where it hurt the most: his business. At first, it was subtle. One morning, Flynn drove into town to pick up a routine order of cattle feed and medical supplies. The owner of the supply store, an old friend of his father's, rubbed his neck uncomfortably when Flynn asked where his order was. "Sorry, Flynn," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. "Your order's been canceled. Payment didn't go through." Flynn frowned. "I paid in advance. Cash." The man sighed, then leaned in. "Look, someone called, said your farm's under investigation for violating livestock health regulations. They told us to pause all deliveries until the matter's resolved." Flynn's stomach turned cold. "What the hell?" he muttered. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was behind it. Randy was playing dirty. The next blow came when Flynn arrived at the local farmer's market. He had been selling his goods, fresh milk, eggs, cheese, and home-butchered meat, there for years. But when he pulled up with his truck full of fresh produce, the market manager, Mrs. Keegan, looked pale as she approached. "Flynn," she started wringing her hands, "we've had some complaints." Flynn crossed his arms. "From who?" She hesitated. "Some residents from Sunrise Valley came by. They're concerned about the hygiene standards of your products." Flynn's blood boiled. "You've never had a problem with my stock before. I've got the best health ratings in the county." "I know," she said quickly, "but we can't risk a scandal. Until this is cleared up, I can't let you set up shop here." Flynn clenched his jaw. The HOA had poisoned his reputation. A few days later, Flynn received an official notice in the mail. The state agricultural department had flagged his farm for an anonymous complaint about unsanitary conditions. Until inspectors could verify everything was up to code, he would be temporarily restricted from selling his products. Flynn slammed the letter onto the table, his hands shaking with fury. They were trying to starve him out. Randy Milton wasn't just trying to keep Flynn off the road, he was trying to bankrupt him. Flynn wasn't a man who backed down. If Randy wanted a fight, he'd damn well get one. First, he contacted every inspector, supplier, and market official affected by the HOA's interference. He gathered every sanitation record, licensing certificate, and compliance form proving that his farm was cleaner than half the restaurants in town. Then, he made a call to the local newspaper. 2 days later, a front-page story ran, "HOA Tyranny, Local Farmer Faces Smear Campaign." The article detailed everything: the false health complaints, the market bans, the blocked shipments. Flynn even managed to get quotes from other farmers who had also been harassed by HOAs in the past. The response was immediate. Locals flooded the farmers' market, demanding Flynn be reinstated. Calls poured into the county commissioner's office, demanding an investigation into Sunrise Valley's HOA. And for the first time, Randy Milton wasn't smiling. Flynn knew one thing: this war wasn't over yet. Flynn Cross had expected Randy Milton to retaliate, but he never imagined the cowardly, underhanded stunt the HOA would pull next. It started late one evening. The farm was quiet except for the soft lowing of cattle settling in for the night. Flynn had just finished checking on his horses when he noticed something strange near the eastern fence. The wooden slats looked off. Frowning, he grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the perimeter. His boots crunched against the dirt as he scanned the fence line. Then he saw it. Someone had cut through the fencing. The wire had been snipped clean, and a section of wood was missing. Flynn's pulse quickened. He wasn't alone. He heard rustling just beyond the opening, followed by hurried whispers. He killed the flashlight, slipping into the shadows as he listened. 2 voices. Men. "Just slash the tires, dump some of that feed in the water. Make it look like a contamination issue." Flynn's jaw clenched. They were trying to sabotage his farm. And then one of them stepped through the broken fence, a dark figure dressed in black, moving quickly toward the barn. Flynn took a breath, calm but cold. Then, with a sharp whistle, he called out to his cattle. The 30 cows in the pasture immediately lifted their heads. They were used to Flynn's signals, but the men, they weren't. Flynn smirked. The lead bull, a massive 2,000-pound monster named Titan, snorted aggressively. The others stirred, sensing an unfamiliar presence in their territory. Flynn took another step forward. "You boys lost." The intruder froze. Then, in a split second, he bolted toward the fence. Bad move. The cows moved. A thunderous sound erupted as the entire herd charged toward the disturbance. The men had no idea what was happening until it was too late. Shit, run! One of them barely made it, but the other one didn't. As he tried to scramble back through the fence, Titan rammed into him. The impact sent him sprawling into the dirt. Before he could react, another cow's hoof slammed into his ribs. A wet crack echoed through the air. The man screamed. Flynn just watched. The second man finally yanked his buddy out of the dirt, dragging him toward the fence. The injured one clutched his side, wheezing in agony. "Come on, man, get up." Flynn took a slow step forward, the dim glow of the farmhouse light illuminating his unamused expression. He rested a hand on his rifle slung over his shoulder, not aiming, just making a point. The uninjured man turned, frantic. "You gotta help him, man, Flynn cut him off. Help him? He motioned toward the cut fence, the damaged wood, the bag of tampered feed lying in the dirt. "You boys broke onto my land. Whatever happened next, that's on you." The man swallowed. We didn't mean—" Flynn shook his head. "Take your friend, get off my property, and don't ever set foot here again." They didn't argue. They grabbed the groaning, injured man and disappeared into the darkness. Flynn didn't bother calling the sheriff. This was just the beginning. Flynn Cross had dealt with his fair share of trouble over the years, but nothing compared to the sheer desperation of Randy Milton's next move. For a few days after the cow incident, things had been eerily quiet. No more fake complaints, no more sabotage, no more HOA goons sneaking onto his land. Flynn knew better than to believe it was over. Randy wasn't the type to admit defeat. He was the type to double down. And double down he did. It was early morning when Flynn set out for town, the sun barely creeping over the horizon. He was driving his old pickup truck, hauling a fresh load of dairy and eggs for the market. As he approached the turn leading to the main road, he saw something glinting in the dirt. His gut tensed. He slowed the truck and climbed out. Then he saw them. A row of black metal spikes welded together in jagged clusters stretched across the entire width of the road. Flynn knelt, running his fingers over the sharp edges. Handmade. Someone had gone through a lot of trouble to ensure that anything with tires or hooves wouldn't make it past. His hands curled into fists. This wasn't just petty HOA harassment anymore. This was criminal. Flynn stood, scanning the neighborhood beyond the road, and then he saw him. Randy Milton stood in his front yard sipping coffee like he didn't have a care in the world. When their eyes met, Randy smirked. Flynn let out a slow, measured breath. Then he pulled out his phone. Sheriff Tate answered on the third ring. "Cross, please tell me it's not them again." "Oh, it's them," Flynn said, taking a slow walk around the spikes. Only this time they took it up a notch. "How bad?" Flynn snapped a photo and sent it over. "Bad enough that I'm filing charges." There was a beat of silence. Then Tate cursed. "Hold tight. I'm on my way." Flynn leaned against his truck, arms crossed, as he waited. Minutes later, the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, kicking up a cloud of dust. Two deputies climbed out, eyes immediately locking on to the spikes. "Jesus," one of them muttered. "Who the hell put these here?" Flynn tilted his head toward Randy's house. Randy wasn't smirking anymore. The sheriff exhaled, then turned to his deputies. "Bag those as evidence. We're about to have a chat with Mr. Milton." As they started toward Randy's front door, Flynn let out a slow smirk of his own. This time, Randy had gone too far. The courtroom was packed. The air buzzed with tension as the judge settled into his seat, flipping through the case files. Randy Milton sat stiffly at the defendant's table, his usual smug confidence nowhere to be seen. Across from him, Flynn Cross sat with his arms crossed, expression unreadable. This wasn't just a civil dispute anymore. After the sheriff's department collected the illegal road spikes as evidence, the district attorney had taken one look at the case and decided to press charges. The list was long. Reckless endangerment, intentional sabotage of public infrastructure, criminal mischief, attempted damage to private property. Flynn had seen Randy squirm before, but never like this. The HOA president was in real trouble now, the nail in the coffin. The prosecution wasted no time. The spikes, the trespassing incident, and the witness statements painted a damning picture. But the real knockout punch came when security footage from the gated community was submitted into evidence. There, on screen, in crystal clear resolution, was Randy and two other HOA members planting the spikes in the dead of night. The judge frowned. "Mr. Milton, Do you have any justification for this? Randy tried. He fumbled through a pathetic excuse about protecting the neighborhood, about how Flynn's farm was a nuisance to the peaceful environment they were trying to maintain. The judge wasn't buying it. You could have killed someone, he snapped. This isn't about peaceful living. This is deliberate criminal action. The verdict came swift and brutal. 5 years in prison for reckless endangerment. A court-mandated order forcing HOA to pay Flynn a massive settlement for damages and harassment. An official disbandment of the HOA due to illegal activity. When the sentence was announced, Randy went pale. Flynn? He just smiled. The aftermath. Flynn drove home that evening, passing through the now quiet neighborhood of Sunrise Valley. The HOA was no more. Several homeowners had already moved out, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. As he passed by one of the remaining houses, an older man, one of the HOA members who had once supported Randy, lifted a hand in a reluctant wave. Flynn gave a small nod in return. Maybe, just maybe, they'd learned their lesson. He pulled onto his land, parking his truck by the barn. His farm was safe. His road was his again. The fight was over, and Flynn Cross had won.